Okay, so we are on our last strip for this unit. In the Canville textbook, we're looking at chapter 55, but in the OpenStax, let me show you where you're going to look at two chapters for this strip. One is chapter 35, and this walks you through some things we don't do a whole lot anymore. We don't really work with biomes anymore, but we do walk through productivity and other characteristics that are associated with biomes. So it's not going to hurt you at all to read this chapter. And then chapter 37 is going to be where we get into some of these biogeochemical cycles. So that you would probably remember that, like the water cycle and the carbon cycle. And I will add those on in these notes. It's also part of this work, but there's not a real question on the strip about it. Okay, so let me go back to the notes and we'll just start taking notes. All right, so why is the transfer of energy in an ecosystem referred to as energy flow, not energy cycling? So this particular question seems really simple, but the concept is really foundational to what we do. So let's think about it. You've got a system, which is this ecosystem. So I'm going to make it, I don't know, something that looks like this. So this is maybe my ecosystem. And all of the matter that's in there, the biomass, the matter that's in that ecosystem, we're going to leave it just kind of shown as shaded. So matter would include, your plant matter, your animal matter, anything in there, your abiotic factors, your rocks, your dirt, all of those pieces. So I'm going to answer this question, but I'm actually starting with matter. Conservation of matter states that all the matter that ever was, still is, and all the matter that is came from matter that was. Okay, so we've got a conservation of matter. So as much as we don't like thinking about stuff like this, the atoms in your body have existed in other forms before they were in your body. So the most, common way to think about it is you really are what you eat. What you eat is not for energy in isolation. Your body is made of matter, and you are constantly reworking and changing that matter. So you've got to have matter as an input, because matter is not created or destroyed. So what matter that we have is what we have had. So we're going to write it really big. Matter cycles. So it changes form, but it's not created. That's how we want to just remember this. So matter changes form, but you don't have to add it into a system. It's going to be there. It may change form, but you don't create it. I don't think I can still see that. I'm going to move that because it's obnoxious. And so is that. All right, you go over here, little cursor. So matter changes form, but it is not created. So the matter that you or anything else you want to think about came from matter that existed previously in a different form. Now let's think about energy. Energy ultimately comes from the sun, which is a constant source of energy. Somewhere on the planet, the sun is always shining. So there's energy from the sun, and this ecosystem, you have to think about things as that whole ultimate causation again. If you have a continual source of energy, you don't have to be as careful with it, if you think about it, as you do if you have a fixed amount of something. So matter is a fixed amount. So that means that there's conservation of matter, and whatever matter we have, we've used in a different form before, and it just cycles through the ecosystem perpetually. Energy, on the other hand, is a little different. We use the word lost. I hate that word. It's not true. It's not lost, because there's also conservation of energy, which just means the energy changes form. But when we say lost, we mean it's not usable to do work. So as the sun brings energy into this ecosystem, much of the energy is going to be lost as heat. So it's not able to do work. And with that being the case, you're going to have a continual source of energy, because you're not 100% efficient. Matter is 100% efficient, because you reuse every bit of the matter. Put it in a different form, you don't lose any, you don't gain any, it's 100% efficient. Energy, on the other hand, is highly inefficient. So energy, put a little couple of notes here. The ultimate source of energy is the sun. The whole process of energy in a system is inefficient. And the reason is because much of the energy, and I'm going to put lost in quotes because I hate it, is lost as heat. And then I want to maybe make it red. A little note here that says what lost is. Lost. It's not lost as in gone, and I can't find it. It's not lost as in wasted. It's lost as heat. So lost means unable to do work. So if we think about ourselves, we are warm-blooded, which means that we maintain a constant temperature. And the way we do that is we purposefully waste some of the energy that we take in, actually a fairly significant amount of your energy is to maintain your body temperature. So it's not doing any work. It is just maintaining the conditions under which your systems work best. And we uncouple some processes with mitochondria, and we release that energy as heat. And that's going to require then, since we're not 100% efficient, you have to have a continuous input of energy. So because of this, so this is going to be our key point, because of this process of energy, where that in a system, what goes in is not going to be able to be fully used to do work, because some will be lost as heat. With energy, it requires constant input. So we have to, and that's where this comes in, we have to have a continual flow of energy into the system. So there must be continual flow of energy. So those are so important, those descriptors. So energy flows, matter cycles. You get that down pat, you'll understand an awful lot about just the way that systems work on this planet. So this planet is in sync with the conditions that you find it in. And the condition we find it is in the Goldilocks spot, the perfect place, to have the right amount of sun that can support, which is plenty, which can support the way that the ecosystem has developed across the whole planet, which is that we don't use all we have. Some of it's lost as heat. It's not usable. And that's okay because we have a constant source. Okay, I think I've already answered this one right here. How does the second law of thermodynamics? So I'm going to find that in the book. I don't think I have that. Hold on just a second. Let me bring that up. Alright, so I found it. I never really thought about pulling that up. I'm sorry. So in chapter 6, you get into a lot of just bioenergetics and how living things, we have a lot of these, you've learned these laws. If you took physics, you've learned them. If you took chemistry, you've learned them. Those systems are different than living systems. Those are artificial systems. You create the actual environment. You can see if something gives off heat or if it requires heat to go through its process. Living systems manipulate the process. Like they have the ability to, I don't know how else to put it, but they game the system. And it's these type of abilities that make organisms successful. And the reason why you have to do this type of thing as a living being is if we look right here, we talk about the second law. I want to say there was more up here. That's the first. Okay. So the second law has to do with, right here's what I'm wanting. So in energy transfer, some amount of energy is lost. Hate that word. In a form that is unusable. So most of the time in biology, we're going to define that as unable to do work. And it says in most cases this form is heat energy. And there they go. Heat energy is defined as the energy transferred from one system to another that is not doing work. And work doesn't mean like you're going out and taking care of pulling weeds in the garden, or you're going to go and build a house. Work has to do in biology with having a set product end. Now, it's not always going to be something that is a physical product, but it's always going to have a purpose and some type of requirement from the system. Okay, so now that we've said that, let's bring that and remind ourselves. So while I've got that up there, I'm just going to write, and you can see it in just a second, I'm going to write that the second law states, because if you haven't worked with these for forever, you're not going to remember them. And then if you have where you've got them in your head, but you got them from physics, that's a different context. And I'm telling you, living things have progressed through time in sync with this planet that we game the system. We have ways of compensating for these losses as heat. We use them. Like, for example, if we didn't have the ability to lose energy as heat, you wouldn't be able to be something that's warm-blooded. So we do that on purpose. We purposefully are inefficient. And that way we can maintain our temperature. So, all right, second states that And any energy transfer, some of the energy is unuseful. I like that. Unuseful rather than lost. So it can't do work. In work, we're just going to put needed processes, so we don't get confused and make it too simple. All right, so that's what I wrote. It's sideways. Are you sideways? Yes, you're sideways. Okay. So how does that second law, which says energy transfer is not efficient, that's what that really means. Energy transfer is not efficient. So let's make it 100%. Explain why an ecosystem's energy supply must be continually replenished. Well, if you're not 100% efficient, but you're doing 100% of work, you're going to have to continually have more energy brought in. Like, that's so sad. I talk with my hands and they're like right there. Excuse me, I hate doing that. I don't have to cough until I'm talking to you. Like, that's just the way that goes. So, because you're not 100% efficient, the system, but you're doing 100% of the work. So I'm going to write that just because that sounds silly. It's very clear. The reason is, I'm going to put therefore in my big 3 dots that we learned. This means I'm about to bring it home. I'm going to tell you the big point, probably the point in the rubric that says, can you tie it all up? So therefore, because the system, doesn't matter what system, they're talking about an ecosystem here, requires 100% energy to do 100%. That just means I'm doing my job. I'm doing my job completely, exactly as I should, to do 100% of the work. Energy lost as heat or any other form. I can't really think of ways that we would do too much other, but sometimes you're purposefully inefficient. So as heat, we're just going to leave it alone because I think that's clear enough. Has to be, well, let's say replenished. Has to be brought in. Somebody's at the door. Just a second. All right. What does that mean to you? Okay. Enough said. Or tapping. All right, so I'm going to. Oh, I've got these colors up here. I've got to use them. So I went ahead and wrote this while I was being fussy. So let's go back to this. What's the deal with this inefficient thing with energy? Like, what does that mean? It means that the system still has to do its entire job. And so it's not going to get energy in one parcel because some of it's going to be inefficient as far as it's going to be not usable. And so we have to bring more in so energy flows into the system in order for it to have enough to continue to do what it's supposed to do. That whole thought right there, I think, has been a multiple choice question. Now, they're not going to ask you, hey, pick one that says what the second law of thermodynamics is. They're not going to do that. But they're going to make you use that to answer a question so that you can demonstrate that you understand oh, we've got to continually put energy in the system, because in order to get 100% of the work, when we're losing 1% of the energy, we've got to replace that energy by energy flowing. That being the case, speaking of on the test, this next question, what is it with me and not numbering some of these either? So that's 1. I put my own numbers in. This is 2. You're going to be 3. You get to be 4. And guess what? Okay, so now I'm on 3. And at the bottom of the page. So much stuff. Okay, so for 3. On the test. Like, big time. And you can do math with this. Just saying. So, it maths. How does net primary production differ from gross primary production? Well, first of all, you might want to know what primary production is. So, primary production. I think that's in both of these chapters. I know that it's defined in 35, and it's talked about in 37. So, let's talk about primary production. Primary, when biologists speak of primary, it has to do with the first level of something. And production in biology is going to refer to producers. So let's just write ourselves a little note. Primary usually deals with the first level of something. You see that? And production is pretty literally about producers. So primary production, let me see how I wrote it over here. I'll take that. Is going to be the total amount of light energy that is converted into chemical energy. By producers. So the light energy that hits the earth, not all of it's used to do this by any means, but it's the amount of the light energy that producers, autotrophs, use another word here, can make their own food. You're not that. They take the chemical energy, they use it for bonds between the matter that has existed for forever, and they rearrange that matter. So producers take carbon dioxide and they use light energy for additional bonds, and they make a chemical called glucose, and the chemical energy is stored in the bonds. So this whole thing we're talking about here is the process of photosynthesis. So I'm going to write that. I'm going to put, hello, this is photosynthesis. I think, maybe, I used all the ink in that pen. So, we have primary production on this planet, and what this does is it lets us convert energy from a very plentiful, ongoing, non-stop source, the Earth, receiving sun somewhere all day, and convert it into chemical energy, which other organisms can use. Now, the producer makes it for itself. No carrot made the carrot mass, the sugars in the carrot, for you. It made it for itself to make it through the winter. But producers can use light and then take the light to make the bonds along with energy, rearrange the matter. So you've got light energy going to bond energy, and you've got matter now that's been formed into a different chemical. Don't ever, ever include yourself in this group. That's the number one crazy thing that I see on tests. So I want to put in really big letters, you are not a producer. Neither is any other heterotroph. So when you answer a question that has to do with primary production, you need to focus on plants, blue-green algae, anything that can be an autotroph and make its own food. Okay? That is a huge big deal. And now we're going to, I'll check this under here, I think. We're going to talk about the math of this primary production deal. Because we're supposed to, how am I going to work that? Move my laptop in my way. Yes, it is. We want to talk about net and gross. If you've worked for any place where you get a paycheck, like not for your parents, but for a paycheck. If I tell you as a, I don't know, as a person who's a boss, and I say, hey, you want to come work for me? You can make $10 an hour. And I have a job I need for you to do, it's 10 hours. Would you be willing to do that? Hey, yeah, $100? You bet. I'd like $100. You're not getting $100. Your check will not be $100. Your gross pay is $100. That means everything with nothing taken out. So let's write that down. Gross. Oh, this pen's so much better. Okay. Is the amount with nothing taken out. I do wish that's what we really made. What you'll probably make is around $75. Because by the time all this stuff comes out, it's usually around 25%. And you'll probably get a check for, I don't know, $74.12. I'm making it up. But you're still not getting $100. So net is what is left over after whatever that you've had to use the money for. So after, how do we want to say that? I don't even know what I'll say. Net is what is left over. Let's put it that way and just stop. After whatever's taken out is taken out. So gross, and we're going to go ahead and use the words here because now we're not talking paycheck. We're really doing notes. Gross primary production. So all the energy that was converted from light to chemical is always larger than what you have left over after you take out for the things that you have to do. So let me be real clear with that. Gross primary productivity would be, I'm just going to use a plant. So it would be all of the light energy that's converted to the chemical energy. So it's all that it made. Now, I don't know if you know how things work when you're in college and you study things in science. There's no way you can just have a science major. Like, you have to have a discipline. And most of the time, you're going to have, strengths because you've had a lot of courses in some things, and you're going to have things that really maybe you didn't like, or you took fewer courses in. But if you did like I did, which I went to the University of Oklahoma, and they're so ginormous that they don't have a College of Arts and Sciences, their College of Science is split into zoology, so zoology is its own college, and so is microbiology. So if you take courses, you don't get to take science courses to get a BS in science. You get a BS in zoology from that college. And that means that I didn't get to take a lot of micro. I did that later in my graduate work. And I didn't get to take a lot of botany because it's also its own thing. So as you think about things, think about what discipline this falls into. So this is a botany thing. And we're talking, let's say, for example, plants. So if a plant is working as fast as it can work, all of the light that it uses and turns into chemical energy, so it's going through photosynthesis and it's making glucose. Now that's an oversimplification, you'll find out later, but whatever. That's the chemical we're making. Plants actually use it for themselves. So when you take classes and they're in botany, you're going to learn about what the plant is doing for itself. It uses its own product. So you've got two contrasting things going on here. One is you are making glucose. So you're going to take light energy and you're going to form glucose. So you're going to make glucose if you're a plant. That process is photosynthesis. Now, I'm an awful person, terrible, lazy, awful. I don't want to write that anymore. That's too many letters. I write this for photosynthesis and put a circle around it. So plants make glucose, but plants use glucose also. Because we always say they make their own food, but then we never think about the fact, well, what are they doing? Plants have to do cellular respiration. They have to do plant business. Like they have to be able to have the energy to function as a plant. So they're going to go through the process of cellular respiration, and cellular respiration is breaking down glucose and getting the energy from the bonds and using it to do work. So I'm lazy again. I'm going to write it here. So yes, they make it, but they also use it. So they don't end up with, at the end, all of the glucose they've ever made, because they've used some. So that's what net primary productivity is. Net is what is left over, because we said that, and we're talking about the chemical energy here. So the chemical energy in glucose. So how much of the product they made, the glucose, what's left over of the glucose after the plant does its own plant business. So after it uses some of it through cellular respiration, after some glucose is used by the plant in cellular respiration. Because it has to live, it has to function, it's got to make molecules, it's got to have different types of reactions that are happening that require energy, so it's got to have that. So this is all it ever made, and this is what's left over after it takes care of its own plant business. So net primary productivity is what really matters. Because, you can talk all day about the $100 you made, but you didn't make $100. You made $74.12. That's what was spendable. That's what you could have as consumed. So because we're humans and we care about ourselves, we care about what's left for me. Net is what's left for me. So that's what we talk about the most. So we could do math. So we could include, so the way this works is gross primary productivity is equal to, here's the math part, the net primary productivity plus the cellular respiration amount that the plant used. So if I tell you any of these, I have to tell you two, you can find the other. So if I ask you how much energy, let's go with that, is used by the plant if gross primary productivity is 10,000 joules and net primary productivity is 8,000 joules. Well, gross is always more than net, so the cellular respiration piece would be 2,000 joules. Simple, simple, simple. And you can do other things with it, like we can do proportions, we can do percents. We could say what percent efficient would this plant be? Well, it would be net, so percent efficient would be net over gross, so about 80%. That's what it did. It used 20% of its own, and then it had 80% left over. Okay. Sorry, this was long. Again, I always think you can pause it. And then I remember it said puzzle. Just don't hate me, because I love y'all. Okay? Just don't hate me. I'm trying my very best to make sure that you feel like you know what you're doing. Okay. Enough of the stop story. Contrast primary production. I probably could put glasses on, but I don't want to. In aquatic and terrestrial systems. Okay, so aquatic, first of all, is going to be water, and terrestrial, I'm going to move this over here, and I'm going to think about what's going on. So I'm going to put aquatic here, and this is what question I decided for. So aquatic, we're going to think about what the limits are. So what's keeping aquatic organisms? So aquatic, I just can't talk. A system would be any type of aquatic producer. So blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, things like that. So it's limited by light and nutrients. So it depends, because you're dealing with water, right? And you've got depth. Anything that needs light is going to have to occur. So light is going to have to be, and this is saying a lot, within the first about 15 meters. After that, there's no light. And most of the light, you'd have to be up in the top meter. So you're going to have a gradient, right, of more light at the top, less light at the bottom. And so aquatic organisms are going to be limited in their production, their ability to do photosynthesis, by light, and the availability of light. And so in this particular case, it has to do with where they're going to live based on the light availability in the water. Now, on top of this, in general, you've also got to have a few other things other than just light. So, with productivity, you can have aquatic systems that are poor, and they're considered poor because of the nutrients. So it's going to be limited by light and nutrients. So if we think about what it takes to make glucose, it takes carbon dioxide, right, and energy from the sun. If you're a producer, that's how you do it. So when we talk about nutrients, you can talk about the fact that you've got to have a steady source of carbon dioxide, and you've got to have light, which you've got to have. This is something important to remember. When you write your answer, light, energy, chemical energy. Always add the energy at the end, because that's what you're really talking about, is the energy that's in the light. You've got to have both of those. So missing any of that, and you're not going to have a producer that can do its primary productivity, because it's got to convert carbon dioxide matter and make it into, rework it into a new form, a new chemical, glucose, by using the light energy from the sun for chemical bonds. So that's what they're talking about there, is what are your limits to being a producer in this environment. So what about terrestrial? So terrestrial, you don't have the fact that you've got light less as the water gets deeper. You do have shade, but in general, there's going to be light. That's not going to be your big limit. So light energy is not the limit. So it's not the limiting agent here. It's going to be two other things. So if you're a producer on land, you're a living thing, and living things have limits for their reactions in their system, and they're based on what most of the, well, pretty much everything that happens is based on enzymes. So you've got all these reactions that are catalyzed by enzymes. Enzymes are molecules, and they're going to have a temperature range where they work best. So terrestrial producers are going to have temperature as a limit, because it's got to be in the range that it can actually function as a system and its reactions will work. And it's based on, honestly, enzymes and moisture. So the other thing that happens, I'm trying to move all of this, so that's my notes. I can move my head. Okay. So it's going to be temperature and moisture. So one thing we talk about with photosynthesis, and it's an oversimplification, is that you need carbon dioxide, right? And what else did you learn you had to have when you did photosynthesis? You have to have water. You have to have energy from the sun. So we'll put sun light energy. And the ultimate rearrangement of things with chemicals, we're going to end up with a new chemical, and you're going to get, my pen's acting funny again. I think it's me. You're going to get glucose on the other end. So all of this process, like your whole photosynthesis is done by photosystems. It's done in plants. It's an enzyme catalyzed reaction process. So photosynthesis, you have to have the enzymes in this particular process, and there's a lot of them. This has to be optimal. So that's where the temperature comes in. The temperature has to be correct for the workers that are going to do this job. And you have to have the water in order to make the glucose. So that's what's limiting on land. The last part for trophic efficiency, I swear I'm coughing. So trophic efficiency we're going to turn the page. This is a first for me. This is going to be defined as what is actually being able to be used by whatever is on the trophic level above and is the consumer of what's below. Now that made no sense, but I'm going to draw it for you, which this is what our question is on Friday. So we usually draw this in like a series of bars. And on the bottom that is the beginning of all of this. Troph means to eat. So we're going to keep up with the energy that's moving through the ecosystem. So the majority of the energy would be in the producers. So the producers make their own food, and they're able to have a certain amount of biomass because they're taking carbon dioxide from the air, and they're making new matter as far as a new combination of the matter into glucose, which increases their mass. So plants do not grow in mass because of what's in the soil. They do not. The change in the mass comes from the carbon dioxide in the air. So carbon dioxide in the air is fixed into an organic molecule called glucose, which has mass, and the producers gain in biomass. And so that's where you're going to have your most biomass. So your energy trapped in those bonds is also the majority of the energy here. Here's the deal. You know how we talked about plants got to live, right? They got to do their own thing. Even if they have all of this amount of energy within this producer system, the primary consumer, which is next, and I hate the way to draw this because I'm really making it the size it is because of the words I have to write in it, but we're going to talk about it. This is what you do for primary. So your primary consumer would be a herbivore, and it's going to eat the producer and use the energy from what it eats to take care of itself. And then it's going to get eaten by something that's going to take the energy in the actual biomass, the body of this organism, and it's going to use that energy for itself. And most of what it's going to do, all of this, is it uses most of it for itself. Like there's not as much as you think put into what's usable for the next level. And then we'll get to tertiary consumer and then quaternary. And it doesn't usually go much farther than that. So if we have an example here, we might have, let's say, wheat or grass. And you'd have a grasshopper. And then maybe you have a mouse. And then maybe you have, I don't know, what would eat a mouse? A snake. And then maybe you have some type of predatory bird. Let's make it an owl. Okay? So trophic efficiency is like ridiculously low. It's super low. So how much is contained in the producers? What's available to the primary consumer? 10%. That's it. So it's 10%. And that's what's known as the 10% rule. So all of the energy that's in the level below, only 10% is available to the next level. So you can see why that this doesn't go on up to where you have to have words for 5, 6, 7, 8 and all that. Because 10% of 10% of 10% is nothing hardly. So you have to have a huge base, tons of energy at the producer level to sustain even one organism up here. This is the argument that people have for being vegetarian, which is that you become this level of consumer instead of way up here. Not that we eat owls, but let's say we did. Then you'd be way up here, and it would take tons, literally, of energy and biomass below to support you. So making the point that this is where people come at that argument. Now, there's big, huge holes in that argument, I'll just say. Okay, so let's do some numbers. So I'm going to have 1,000,000 joules of chemical energy stored in the bonds of glucose. The primary consumer does not have 1,000,000 joules available to it because, believe it or not, the producers use 90% of it for themselves. And I'll show you what it's tied up in, what the 90% is. So only 100,000, whoops, got my stuff going crazy here. So 100,000 joules now. So we just took one of the zeros off, right? Is available. So we only have that much available to this group. So whatever eats the herbivore, the mouse, now we're at 10,000. The snake, we're at 1,000. And for the owl, there's just 100. So if you think about it, 100 of the 1,000,000 is all that's available when you get to the top. So 10% of 10% of 10% of 10% is a whole lot of nothing. And so you run out of trophic levels. So these are trophic levels. They're always going to have these general terms. They ask you to work with actual organisms. And my favorite thing that's ever happened is one of the questions was an aquatic. So do an aquatic ecosystem, and somebody put a squirrel. This is not SpongeBob. Squirrel does not live there. So you got to pay attention to the directions and actually put the organisms that belong there. If you're not sure, let's say, for example, you put like algae, and then you think, I'm lost. Like, I don't know what eats that. I think maybe, I don't know, a fish does, I'm going to say. I don't know. And then I'm lost. I'm for real lost. You can put bigger fish, even bigger fish, biggest fish, and you'll never be wrong. You don't have to come up with actual names in an ecosystem when your brain is working on about 70% because you're taking a test and there's anxiety. So let's go here. So where did the 90% go? Where did it go? We said it's not lost, as far as that's a bad word, but where did it go? Well, there's a lot of things as far as that 100%. Weird as it seems, if you get on up here into the consumer pieces, there's a lot of unused energy in poop. So some is still in feces. We just didn't get to use it all. Some of it we didn't get to break down. Like, we don't break down the bonds in cellulose. Cellulose, like in some of the plant cell walls. It just passes through as fiber. Other organisms eat poop, and they can actually break that down and get the energy for it. So some of that 90% is in waste product. And some of it, most of it, is going to be used for cellular respiration. And just think about this. This is just the day-to-day cost of being that organism. I always make the joke, plants got to live. So most of what that 90% is used to take care of my plant business. Like, I got to live. And then some of it, depending on how this works, can be heat. So if you have to just explain where, wait a minute, there's an awful lot of energy there. What happened to the 900,000 joules? Well, the plants used it. They used it, but they used it to be a plant. Okay, well, of this 100,000, you've only got 10,000. What happened to the 90,000 that this secondary consumer couldn't get? Well, the primary consumer used it to be its own little grasshopper self, and in grasshopper poop. Now, grasshoppers are not warm-blooded, so they're not going to have much loss of heat, but it's just gone. And the reason why this doesn't matter This is okay. It is purposeful. It is meant to be this way. And the reason why it's okay is because another day, more sun. It's because we have unlimited, I'm going to put because, unlimited flow of light energy. You have abundance, things become wasteful. So there is no selective pressure to be efficient. Just saying. So you may want to go take a break. I don't get the option of taking a break because I'm going to build out this table for you that's summarized in chapter 37. And what I'm going to do, I think, is just draw it in bigger words over here. So I'll pause, and then I'll have it already written when I come back. And I'm going to color code it, and then I'll just talk you through a little bit of it, but not a whole lot. Again, you're the best. Okay, I'm done. I don't know how long that took. 12 minutes, maybe? I don't know. But we're building out a page, and all I did was turn it sideways, and we're going to summarize the cycles. I think those are in chapter 37. It's 35 or 37 in the OpenStax book. I would read them. I would read that just to clear this up in your head. Everything you learned when you were younger is still true, but there's just a lot more to it. So the 4 different ways we're going to focus on the cycles is the biological importance of that cycle. So, for example, the biological importance of water is that you're not going to have photosynthesis without it. You're not going to have decomposition where you break molecules down, because hydrolysis is the name of the process where you break molecules down, and water is an absolute requirement. So that's going to be the way you need to think about that. So the biological importance. For carbon, we are carbon-based life. There could not be a more important molecule in biology. Carbon's it. So we're going to let carbon have a special little thing going on. Carbon, guess what? You are the queen. Because there is no life without you. The biological importance of nitrogen is in these molecules where nitrogen is found. So amino acids have nitrogen in them. Nucleic acids have nitrogen in them. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Nucleic acids are the building blocks of DNA and RNA. The biological importance of phosphorus is it's found in these molecules. Phosphorus is found in nucleic acids, so the building blocks of DNA and RNA, in phospholipids, which make up cell membranes, in ATP, which is what my grandmother calls walking around money. It's the basic energy currency of the cell, and we find it in bones and teeth. People throw this out because they always talk about that, but it's in the teeth. Then you have where would water be found as? And so it's available, where is this available to these living things? The available forms of water would be liquid water and vapor. You would not consider ice an available form, could be used right this minute. The available form of carbon is in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. That's the most way it's used. So that's the usable form. Nitrogen is found as ammonium, nitrate, and also in amino acids. Phosphorus is found in phosphate groups. Reservoirs would be the storage at the earth level. Where would we store water at the earth level? Oceans, glaciers, because it's storage. So I put here as they melt, just as a reminder that they become available at that point. The ice caps are storage for water, lakes are storage for water, rivers and groundwater storage for water. Where do we have earth-wide storage reservoir for carbon? Well, since carbon's in every living thing, it's going to be the remnants of living things. Fossil fuels, remnants of organic matter. Soils have organic matter where things die and become part of the soil and the sediment. And then the living things themselves would be the reservoir for the carbon. Where would the reservoir for nitrogen be? All of this other stuff, soil, sediment, surface water, biomass, meh. It is the atmosphere. By far, that is where the nitrogen is found. So where do you find phosphorus? Where's a reservoir for that on the earth? Well, it's going to be where living things have been. So sediment, soil, in the oceans, in living things. What are some key processes that involve water? So names of processes where water is involved. Evaporation, condensation, transpiration, surface flow. All of those would be processes that water is involved with. What are some processes that carbon's involved with? Photosynthesis, cellular respiration, burning of fossil fuels. And then for nitrogen, there's this called nitrification, and then there's ammonification. So you're actually putting nitrogen into a molecule, and then you can take it out. Denitrification is also one. So those processes involve bringing nitrogen out of the atmosphere, we'll put our point here, and into an organic molecule, like amino acids, nucleic acids, usable for living things. So what are the key processes that are involved with like phosphorus? Weathering, which is going to come from this erosion sediment soil piece, and then decomposition. But there is no gaseous form, so don't dare say that you're going to get phosphorus from the atmosphere, because you're not. So I would just put this in my notebook. These are on multiple choice questions. And a lot of times they just expect that you know stuff, like especially when it comes to nitrogen, that since most of the nitrogen is in the atmosphere, and yes, as I breathe, I take all of the air into my lungs, but I send all that nitrogen right back out because I can't do a thing with it. In order to get nitrogen into a form that I can use, you have to have nitrogen-fixing bacteria to do that. So that's going to be some of the kinds of things that they expect you to know. Sorry this is so long, but it really should have been 2 strips, maybe 3. So just letting you know. But again, what are you? You're the best.